Hello, Meditation Mastery. Welcome to the last video about the Eightfold Path in the series. I am coming to you today from Billings, Montana. Kind of in the middle of nowhere. We were having some car trouble, so we stopped here. And I thought this would also be a great place to sit and drop in with you and make a video. Over the last couple of videos, we've been building up how the Eightfold Path works. So again, I mentioned the Eightfold Path. It's kind of like different conditions that when you bring together, it grows the mind of enlightenment, kind of like if you take a seed of a flower and you give it water and you give it soil and sunlight, those conditions together grow the flower. So the mind is like that seed, and when you give the mind these different 8 conditions, the mind grows. So we spoke already that you need to have the right understanding of what's going on. You need to have the right intention. You need to give the right effort, the right action. You have to have the right speech. You have to have the right livelihood, so kind of how you're connecting with the world, how you're supporting yourself. And the last couple that I wanted to mention today, one of them is right mindfulness, and one of them is right concentration. So when we talk about right mindfulness, when I give my retreats, when I speak to educators and teachers and I explain what is mindfulness, I kind of say, mindfulness, it's like a flashlight and you can shine it on different things, right? So usually the mind is just bouncing from here to here to here to here to here. It's going around wherever it wants. Mindfulness is kind of when you take control of the mind and you say, go here, look at this. Right? This is what I'm interested in seeing and doing. Choosing your object of attention, choosing your direction of attention, right? So mindfulness is kind of where you're pointing your mind. And there's only a couple places that you can point your mind. And this is actually pretty interesting and important to know, because if you really break down your experience, you'll see that there's only really a few things that you can experience. So one of the things that you can experience is forms, and they say forms is like body. So it's like you have your internal body, I guess you could say. You have your body sitting here, but I have this table in front of me. I have these walls, that there's forms around me, right? So the experience of form, material, is one thing that you can be giving your attention to. Another thing you can give your attention to is feeling. So the feelings that the Buddha says, there's actually only 3 feelings, and feelings also is called sensations. So the Buddha said there's actually only 3 sensations that you can have, and that's pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral. So there's things that either feel good, it's a pleasant sensation. There's things that are an unpleasant sensation, and there are things that are neither pleasant or unpleasant. So these are the 3 different sensations you can feel. So it's a whole meditation practice just to sit and feel, what are the sensations? Does this feel pleasant? Does this feel unpleasant? Does this feel neutral? Does it feel pleasant, unpleasant, neutral? Breaking down your feelings. Because what happens after you feel something and you experience it as pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral, there comes a labeling. You decide that this thing is good, bad, you want it, you don't want it. Your perception comes in, right? So this is the next thing you can look at, your perceptions. How you conceptualize everything around you. How you relate to things in a way that actually becomes pretty solid, pretty permanent. If you encounter a person and they're very friendly to you, then in your mind you go, oh, this person is a nice person. But then maybe after, a couple more sentences, they say something that triggers you and you say, oh, this person is a jerk. That you have a label, and then you switch your label and you give them another one, and you switch it and then you'll give them another one. But sometimes you see someone and they say something and you say you're a jerk, and you give them that perception of jerk, and that perception stays. And maybe 10 years later, you still think of that person, you say, oh yeah, that person's a jerk. But the truth is that person is not a jerk. That's just your perception. That's your concept that you've placed on them, and it hasn't moved. This is something that we do for our survival. If every morning we woke up, if you think about our ancestors, if they woke up and they had to every morning re-examine what is a blade of grass, what is earth, what is sky, if they had to rebuild their concepts every morning, they wouldn't even have time to eat or drink. They would just die, right? They'd be immobilized because they wouldn't know what anything is. So for very clear biological reasons, we build up a conceptual structure, a conceptual framework that we wake up and that's the grass, this is the hut that I'm in, that's the food, that's the water. But what starts to happen is that once we start building more and more and more concepts, we start to get lost in those concepts, and then we stop actually seeing things like they are. When I'm on meditation retreats, and I've heard this from other people too, once you've been meditating for a while, you go outside and maybe you'll look down and you'll see like a leaf, and it'll be the most beautiful leaf you've ever seen because you're actually looking at things again, right? Or you look at the sky and say, wow. Or it gets even more amazing when you turn to somebody who's been with you, maybe your partner, maybe one of your parents, maybe one of your kids, somebody that's been with you for years and years and years, and you've just had this label on them, oh, this is my partner, this is my friend, this is my parent, this is my child. And when you finally look at them again and let go of all of your concepts of who and what they are, and you really look at them, it's a really powerful and amazing experience. And oftentimes you'll realize, wow, I'm almost like seeing you for the first time. I haven't seen you in a long time. And there's something really beautiful about identifying your perceptions, because perceptions can also trap you in things, right? Perceptions create also limiting ideas, but also perceptions, they stop you from being able to make new experiences with the truth, new experiences with reality. So by kind of opening up our perceptions, we can often live a much richer, fuller, more liberated life, okay? So after there's perceptions, right? So again, so there's the forms, right? There's things. There's the feelings that come up when we interact also with them. So let's say, for instance, like I have our little dog here. So I see the dog, so right, like form meeting form, I see him. The feeling comes up, a feeling of like, ooh, that's cute, right? Or feeling it's the feeling of like pleasure, right? Oh, I want to, the response that we have to something cute, this feeling of like warmth and affection that comes over us, right? And then this perception, okay, that's cute, that's something that I really like. And then the next step of that, it's called sankhara, and that's the volition, and that's the movement, and that's the action, which is then I say, I want to pet that dog, right? That there's something that once we feel a certain way, we have a certain idea about something, we're perceiving a situation, then we act on that. And our volition creates a movement, and that movement is also called karma. Because that movement, even if you look at how the brain works, brain scientists say the same thing. Once you've done an action a few times, your brain starts to grow together so that it's easier and easier and easier for you to do that action. Until what happens is originally our synapses, they use chemical connections. So it has to kind of send like an electrical signal across these chemicals, and it's received over here. But every time you do that action, these synapses grow closer and closer and closer together until they actually bond. And then there's no chemical kind of middleman. They just send the electricity directly. It creates like a closed circuit. And that's why when we have an ingrained habit or a pattern, it's so hard to break, because our brain has literally grown together. And what happens is that if you want to make a new habit, you have to, again, start from that place where it's just working through a chemical field. And you have to keep doing it and doing it and doing it until the brain grows. And then you create that new habit, and it kind of cements there in your brain. So this is kind of a physiological explanation also of how karma works. But so if I pet the dog and he's really soft and he's sweet and that was nice, then every time I see that dog, I'm going to want to pet it again because I'm going to want that same feeling again and again. This is also how addiction works, right? This is how a lot of our habits work. Conversely, if I went over to that dog and I pet it and he bit me and I made a negative experience about that, then every time I saw that dog, I'd have negative perception, and I would create an action out of that perception, which would maybe be to yell at the dog or push it away or become afraid and come, like hide up in a chair or something. That I would create a whole new story around it and a whole new set of karma, a whole new set of movements. So when you break things down like this, you can also see how there are these actions and interactions that create almost like a chain that we usually experience as a seamless flow. But when you break it down, you can see the individual components of that. And it also allows you to start playing around with things and changing them. When I went to see Tony Robbins, he talked about this in another way. He said that he had a man that was smoking cigarettes, And the man's like, I love cigarettes and I can't quit and I can't quit, and I want to keep smoking. And Tony said, yeah, okay, let's keep smoking. And he's like, rent a hotel room for us. So the guy rented a hotel room, and Tony Robbins comes down with a carton of cigarettes. And he sits down and he locks the door, and he's like, smoke. And the guy smokes and he goes, no. And he like has him smoke like 5 at a time, and the guy's like coughing. And he's like, do you still want to smoke? And the guy's like, yes. And he goes, smoke some more. So he picks up another handful and he has him smoke like a bunch of cigarettes at once, And the guy's coughing and stuff. And finally he's saying, no, I don't want to smoke. And Tony said, doesn't matter, smoke more. And Tony Robbins is like this big hulking guy. He's like, smoke those cigarettes. And he smokes more. And then he said, keep smoking. And then finally the guy says, you can't make me smoke. And then Tony Robbins says, good. Because what Tony Robbins did is that he saw that man had a connection to cigarettes which was pleasurable, right? That the feeling that came up was pleasure, which created a concept, a perception, cigarettes make me happy. And then it created an action, I keep smoking, and it created a cycle of addiction. Also, the chemicals in the cigarettes start to work on the body, so the body reacts, the feelings come up. So it creates a nice little closed circle of wanting to keep smoking. What Tony Robbins did is he came in, and what he did was he shifted that the man used to find cigarettes pleasant and pleasurable, but because Tony Robbins gave him such an unpleasant experience of cigarettes, he shifted his perception. He shifted the feeling. So first the feeling of the cigarettes being good turned into the cigarettes are actually painful. The cigarettes are not good. Yeah, the cigarettes make me feel a lot of displeasure in myself, right? And then he added the concept to that, the perception that these are not good, that I don't want these, right? And then the action of saying no and stopping to smoke. So that's one way that a therapist will start to break someone out of a habit, right? They'll say smoke the whole pack, drink the whole bottle, that they'll make you feel sick off of the thing that you thought you liked, so you create a new relationship to it, that you create a new perception about it and a new feeling, and then create new actions out of that. So that's kind of how these work together, right? But the last one of these, this is just consciousness itself. So by the way, these 5 things that I'm talking about, so forms, feelings, perceptions, the word for like movement or karma or volition, and then the last one, it's consciousness. These 5 things, these are called the 5 skandhas or the 5 khandhas in Buddhism. And what these 5 things are, this is actually all that we are. That the Buddha said, all we are as people, me, I'm a person, actually all that I am is form with feelings and perceptions and movements, reactions, interactions, and consciousness. That's all a person is. That's all every living creature is just these 5 things. So you can actually break yourself down into just these areas, which is also really fascinating if you want to really get into the fabric of what this experience is. You'll see you can only ever experience these 5 things. That's it. So the last one, consciousness, it's actually consciousness is, because we have a body consciousness, right? We feel. We have a visual consciousness. We see. We can smell, right? So we have the smell consciousness, the taste consciousness, and then we have the mind consciousness that experiences things internally. So if you really look closely, that we have what they're called sense organs. Our skin is a sense organ. So our skin that covers our whole body that feels things. So that's a sense organ, right? Our sight, our eyes are a sense organ. Our nose, our tongue, our ears, right? These are sense organs. And then we also say the mind is a sense organ. And the sense organs receive sensory information. So like the eyes receive sight. The ears receive hearing, So the eyes will see light. We'll even say it like this, break it down even more clearly. That the eye is the sense organ, and then there's light that's coming into the eye, and then seeing is the consciousness. So we say that there's a sense organ, there's an external form that comes in. So we say in this case, like the eye is a sense organ, the light is the form that comes in, and then the consciousness arises to meet them. And that would be the seeing, right? So all of our senses, there's first a physical sense base, we call it in Buddhism, which is like the body, the ears, the eyes, the nose. These are the sense bases. And then each of the sense bases can receive. The ears receive sound, they receive vibrations, right? And when the ear receives a vibration, then hearing arises. When the eye receives light, seeing arises, right? When the nose receives a smell, an odor comes, then I guess smell is still the word for it, then we smell, right? Then the smelling comes up, right? So each of our sense organs then also can receive a sense object, and then the consciousness is the thing that perceives and receives it. In Buddhism, we talk about having 6 senses. The 6th sense is the mind. And we say the mind is also a sense organ, just like the eye is a sense organ. And the mind receives sensory information. And the mind receives thoughts, feelings, perceptions, everything that's happening on the mental level, that's happening through the mind. So also we have these different senses, these different consciousnesses that overlay onto each other. So it creates for us one experience. But if you sit and you really focus, you'll notice that your sight and your taste and your hearing, they're all kind of happening in almost like different dimensions, right? If you close your eyes and you just eat something and you taste it, or you close your eyes and you smell something, you're kind of in one space. And if you look, you have this, it's like a spatial orientation. It's very different. If you experience something in the mind, yet again, it's a different place. So it's almost like we're overlaying these different dimensions, these different levels and layers of consciousness onto each other and experiencing it as one whole as the mind kind of jumps back and forth between all the different consciousnesses. So I understand that I'm giving you a lot of information right now. It might seem technical, it might seem overwhelming. It's actually very simple. What this information is actually doing, it's just breaking down your experience of what it means to be a human being. It's really saying everything you can experience as a person, let's give it a label, let's tell us what it is, let's experience it individually, separately, isolate it so we can really fully understand it, and then see how it interacts with other things. Right? So the Buddhist approach, it's actually quite scientific. It's the science of the mind. That it really isolates components, tries to understand them, look at them, see how they function, see how they interact, and then we come back in, we can see the whole system working around itself. Right? So this is all very important to understand and to see. And again, watch this video a few times if you want. Think about it, drop in. Again, I was in the monastery for 8 years. I spent a lot of time just sitting and saying to myself in my head, this is sight, this is feeling, these are thoughts, just thinking, saying the word, thinking in my head, thinking, just to really isolate. That's what a thought is, And when you can break all these things down, right, we use our mindfulness and we shine the light of our mind on these different layers, on these different things, on these different consciousnesses. We start to kind of understand what is what inside of us. We start to gain insight, wisdom, understanding. And what comes after all of this is the last one, which is right concentration, which is actually then the meditation. So right concentration is once taking all of the kind of 8 folds of this path. So once we have the right intention, once we have the right understanding of how all of this stuff works, once we start living our life in a way that feels more uplifted, more peaceful, we start having more wholesome speech with people, more wholesome actions, our livelihood is better, and we start understanding the different levels and layers of mind. We see the inner constructs, so we kind of see the whole picture, and we start living our lives in a happier, uplifted, softer way. That what happens is that the mind starts to collect inwards. Right? The mind isn't so scattered and lost. The mind always kind of knows where it is, and you're sending the mind into a specific direction. You're sending the mind in the direction of peace. Through living a more peaceful life, through having more peaceful speech, through having a different relationship with your internal world, you're slowly collecting your mind into the body, into the perceptions. You're looking at the mind itself. You're looking at the body itself. You're understanding the different constituent components of your experience. Yeah, and all of that means that the mind is starting to come inward. It's starting to focus, and it's bouncing around, focusing on itself, not getting lost in things, right? Not seeing the dog and going, and running over and petting it and thinking how cute it is. But you're really starting to see like, oh, dog, cute, urge, yeah, action, karma, thirst, feeling, unpleasant, water, want, karma, action, that you start seeing things much more clearly and how things are running your life, how you're running your life, but how things are also running you. Because what happens is that our habits and our volitions, they get out of our control. And this is a really important place where you come in. When I became a monk and you have to wear a robe and you shave your head and you have to follow certain precepts, and you have a teacher who's kind of pushing you around all the time, what it does is it has to start breaking you out of a lot of your conditioned responses, your conditioned perceptions of things, your conditioned feelings, right? That things are pleasant or unpleasant. This thing is good or bad. I want this or I don't want this. I'm going to do this or not do that. That you start breaking through all these different levels. You start making new experiences. Oh, things that I thought were pleasant are actually unpleasant. Things that I thought were unpleasant are actually pleasant. You start making new perceptions, right? When I was in college, it would be about drinking beer and, watching sports and trying to find girls and having fun and just doing all this crazy stuff. And I'd feel like exhausted and distracted, and I was like actually quite depressed during a big part of my time in college. But I had my perception of what happiness was, what you're supposed to do for happiness. I get into the monastery. No drinking, no TV, no girls, no sports, right? All the things that I used to do to find happiness, I couldn't do. And then what happened was I had to start building and creating a new set of things that were good for me, but that also I wanted to do. And I had to kind of like reinvent myself in a more wholesome way. So this starts happening when we start looking at the path. We start shifting our habits. And it's difficult, right? It was hard not being with girls. It was hard not drinking and running around and having fun with friends. It was really hard. All of my urges wanted to do that. I'd see a pretty girl and my urge would go, right? You'd see there was a bar down the street and my urges would go. Things would pull me to those, my karma would be pulling me because I've made the experience that that's pleasurable. My perception said that's pleasurable. My past actions, my brain had grown together. So everything about me wanted to go to that thing and to really set up that hard wall, the wall of the monastery, the wall of the robes, the wall of my precepts. It kept me inside that I had to watch my mind trying to grab at things, and I had to kind of discipline it and say, no, that's not what you want. That's not going to bring you happiness. That's the wrong view. That's the wrong understanding. That way it's endless. It keeps going. You want to focus on yourself. You're at the monastery right now to be with yourself, to learn how to be present, to learn how to feel good right here without taking a substance or needing another person. Right, that the monastery was about training the mind to be here, training the mind not to run after things. And to train the mind like a dog on a leash running after things, you have to be able to stop it. You have to be able to understand what it's doing, why it's doing it. If you ever watch like the dog whisperer videos on YouTube or something, he knows how dogs function so well that whatever a dog does, he's like, oh, it's just, that's dominance. Oh, that's playful. Oh, that's aggression. That he can label it so he knows how to respond. The same things with your mind. Every time your mind is acting, reacting, running somewhere, you have to kind of understand what it's about to be able to respond. To know when's the time that you say, yes, go, do that, good job, good for you. When's the time that you have to pull it back and say, actually, that's not good for you, that's not what you want. When can you divert the attention, that you're like, oh, I really want an ice cream, and then you say, okay, well, how about if you finish cleaning your room, then you can get an ice cream. That you kind of divert the energy of wanting something right now into something productive. How can you work with your mind? How can you kind of shift things around that you get your mind to become an ally, that you understand yourself? It all starts from understanding these different levels, these different layers. You become your own therapist, kind of. You see how things are running, how things are working, and you start to know why and how to kind of shift those and change their directions. And then when we start to do the meditation, as the last of the Eightfold Path, the mind really starts to be able to sink into these deeper places. The mind is much more familiar with itself, and the mind has also started to learn how to handle itself. So it learned how to stay here, how to kind of collect in, and then it starts to feel good. The meditation starts to feel really, really good, and the mind wants to be present. It feels like a relief. You feel relieved to not have to be seeing things, to not have to be talking, to not have to be thinking about stuff, to not have to be doing things. It starts to feel like a huge relief to be able just to be here, to let things go, that the mind starts to want to collect onto itself, that instead of having a connection to all of the senses, the mind actually starts to shut off the senses. It pulls the consciousnesses into the mind consciousness. And eventually when you get into the deepest meditation, the samadhi, the mind consciousness, all of the energy, all of the senses pools into that one place. So actually when you're in deep meditation, you're not feeling your body anymore, you're not thinking anymore, you're not hearing anything. The mind, it's almost like on a closed loop. That if you're in the really deepest levels of meditation, somebody could come over to you and say your name and you wouldn't know, because you're not hearing anything. You're just inside. You've turned inwards. The mind is connected and experiencing itself. Yeah, it's just the awareness of the mind itself, and that's it. And then it starts breaking that down in more and more fine and subtle levels, right? Letting go of the even the feelings of like happiness. It breaks away, because even happiness, it's a lot of movement, right? And it breaks away from happiness, and then it starts to feel more peaceful, and then it starts to break away from that. It starts to just feel more spacious, right? And then it breaks away from the feeling of space, and then it's almost like just the feeling of awareness itself. So the mind gets subtler and subtler and subtler once you get just into that mind space. These are the deeper levels of meditation. I don't talk about these that much, just because these are for, you have to be a pretty advanced student to really start to get in there, like on retreat. Because you have to be at the place where your entire world, you have a relationship to it, that you're not getting pulled anywhere, that you're completely present continuously within yourself, within your mind. And then you start to go into these states, and then you can drop into more and more subtle levels. And then eventually, this is what enlightenment is that the mind just starts realizing itself. It starts breaking down in the deepest of levels, and it starts to see how its constituent parts are, how it runs, and it starts to let go. It starts to see that there isn't anything out there that I want or don't want or I'm going after. It's nothing that I'm trying to do. The mind just starts to see itself, and it starts to just see how it's a process. The feeling of self falls away. The feeling of I am falls away. The perceptions break. Yeah, that all of these different levels just, they just pop open with these new experiences. And the mind just understands things how they are, right? And this is like the release, that the mind understands it is just part of a process. It is a connection and a collection of different things. And when the mind really sees things as they are, this is where freedom comes from, right? And then this is also why you see these like incredibly peaceful monks, this idea of an enlightened person who's almost like unshakably present and peaceful and non-attached, and because they're not actually clinging even to a feeling of like a self, like an I am here. It's just they're just experiencing, it's like the mind experiencing a process. It's just the mind experiencing itself on a continuity, that the mind cannot be taken away. Once you've seen the truth, you can't get wrapped up in anything again. You know how it is, right? If you've waken up from a dream, you know that that dream was just a dream. Yeah, once you've woken up from this reality into that how things really are, that real deep experience of what is mind, what is truth, what is reality, then you come back to this place. You can't get caught up in it anymore. And you'll experience this in little pieces as you practice. You get little glimpses of this. There's different little things that you realize that used to trigger me, it doesn't anymore. I used to want that thing, I don't anymore. That used to matter to me, it doesn't anymore. I used to take this really seriously, I don't anymore. That you'll slowly see as you're practicing little pieces of things, you start to create almost like a dispassion to things that you just leave. You say, it's okay, and you just put them down. But that gets deeper and deeper until it really becomes an experience in the mind of itself, and the mind itself just lets things go. And then it's kind of free, and then that's it. It stops creating more karma. It stops going after things, because it's understood there is nothing to go after. It's just a process of stuff arising. Yeah, and then it lives this peaceful life. So that's kind of the path, the Buddhist path to enlightenment. Yeah, kind of the whole way through, using the Eightfold Noble Path. Okay? So we're going to do a meditation, and I hope you enjoy. I hope that made sense. Feel free to listen to it a few times. And by my next talk, I should actually be back in Boston, so trip over. So thank you guys for joining me in this time, and look forward to meditating with you soon.